The night air was heavy with silence, broken only by the faint rustle of leaves as the pregnant woman walked slowly down the dimly lit street. She carried herself with grace, though her steps were careful, one hand gently resting on her rounded belly. The soft glow of the street lamps traced a halo around her, a symbol of quiet innocence moving through the shadows. Unaware of the danger trailing her, she adjusted her shawl against the evening chill, her mind occupied with thoughts of the new life growing inside her. Behind her, keeping a precise distance, moved a figure cloaked in darkness. His footsteps were measured, his breathing calm, every motion calculated. The hitman had stalked countless targets before, each job a task to be completed, each life nothing more than a number on a contract. His gloved hand brushed against the cold steel of the weapon hidden beneath his jacket, a reminder of why he was there. His instructions were clear: end her life. Clean, quick, and without mistake. Yet, as his eyes fixed on the woman before him, something unsettled him. She wasn't like the hardened men or corrupt figures he had eliminated in the past. There was fragility in her movements, a softness in the way she paused to breathe, her hand instinctively caressing her unborn child. For the first time in years, his chest tightened with something he could not name. His finger twitched near the trigger, but his body refused to move. She stopped to adjust her bag, and the faint lamplight illuminated her face. A quiet serenity lingered in her expression, as though she carried within her not fear but hope. The hitman steadied himself, yet the hesitation grew stronger. The job demanded silence, but his conscience whispered rebellion. In a lavish penthouse high above the city, the mistress sat curled in a velvet armchair, her eyes glinting with a mix of envy and rage. She had everything a woman could desire: expensive jewelry, designer gowns, nights filled with champagne and indulgence, but none of it felt like enough. What gnawed at her was not what she lacked in wealth, but what she lacked in legitimacy. She was the shadow, the secret, the hidden lover who could never step into the light. The wife, with her serene smile and her pregnancy glowing like a badge of purity, was everything she despised. To the mistress, that unborn child represented the final lock on the life she craved. Once the baby arrived, the wife's place in the man's heart and home would be unshakable, and she would forever remain a disposable pleasure. Her hatred festered, boiling into a desperate plan. She wanted the wife gone, not just humiliated, not just discarded, but erased. Greed whispered in her ear, reminding her that once the wife was out of the picture, the man would have no reason not to choose her. She pictured herself draped in the wife's jewels, walking proudly through the halls of his mansion, the world finally recognizing her as the rightful woman beside him. The fantasy intoxicated her, pushing aside the last threads of morality she possessed. She poured herself another glass of wine and dialed a number she had been given by a shady acquaintance. The voice on the other end was deep, calm, and without emotion. A professional. The kind of man who didn't ask questions, who didn't care about motives, only about payment. Her heart raced as she explained what she wanted, her words laced with venom. "Make it look like an accident," she whispered, her tone sharp but trembling slightly at the edges. "I don't want her alive when this is over." The arrangement was sealed with staggering amounts of money, the kind that bought silence and precision. She leaned back after ending the call, satisfaction spreading across her lips like poison. To her, it was simple. One life removed, another life elevated. The mistress believed she had orchestrated the perfect plan, but in her arrogance, she overlooked one fatal flaw: hearts, even hardened ones, don't always follow contracts. The pregnant wife lived a life that, from the outside, seemed ordinary, yet there was a quiet beauty in the way she carried herself. She was not obsessed with wealth or appearances, nor did she boast of her husband's status. Instead, her joy came from simple things: arranging flowers on the dining table, reading soft lullabies aloud in the nursery she was preparing, and feeling the gentle flutter of her baby moving inside her. Each kick was a promise of the future, each heartbeat a reminder that she was bringing life into the world. Her kindness extended to everyone around her. Neighbors often spoke of her generosity, of the way she would stop to ask about their children or send small gifts of food when someone fell ill. Even strangers were touched by her warmth. She had a natural grace that made people feel seen and valued. Despite the growing loneliness in her marriage, the subtle coldness of a husband too absorbed in power and wealth. She never allowed bitterness to take root. Her hope for her child's life was stronger than her sadness, and it became the foundation on which she stood each day. In her, there was vulnerability, yes. Softness in the way her hands trembled when she thought too much about the future, fear when she felt alone at night. But it was the kind of vulnerability that made her human, not weak. Her innocence was not ignorance, but a choice to hold on to goodness even when surrounded by shadows. The contrast with the mistress could not have been sharper. Where the wife dreamed of cradling her baby in a home filled with love, the mistress schemed for power and possession. Where the wife's heart beat with patience and loyalty, the mistress's pulse raced with envy and greed. One woman longed to nurture life, the other plotted to destroy it. And in this divide lay the cruel irony. The wife, pure and unassuming, had no idea that malice was already circling her steps. The hitman had lived most of his life in the shadows, a ghost who moved between cities and left behind whispers of fear. Trained in precision and discipline, his past was littered with jobs completed without hesitation. He had once been a soldier, molded by war into a weapon that followed orders without question. Years of service had sharpened his instincts but dulled his humanity, leaving him to navigate the civilian world with the same cold efficiency that made him valuable in battle. When the military ended, his skills found a new purpose in darker corners: contracts, bounties, assassinations. To those who paid him, he was a solution; to those who crossed him, he was the end. On the surface, he appeared unshakable. His eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen too much, and his body moved with a mechanical precision that suggested he had long ago buried emotion beneath steel. But inside, cracks had begun to form. The years of bloodshed had left him restless, and though he never admitted it aloud, a quiet weariness haunted him. Each time he pulled a trigger or tightened a grip, the act felt heavier than the last. He began to wonder what remained of the man he once was, if there had ever been anything left beyond the violence. Despite this weariness, he continued. Killing was not just a profession but a prison. It was the only life he knew. Morality had no place in his world, or so he told himself. Yet, sometimes, when the city was silent and the night too long, he caught himself thinking of the lives he ended, the stories he had erased with a single motion. Those thoughts unsettled him more than bullets ever had. When the mistress approached him with her offer, he accepted with his usual calm. Another contract, another payment. Nothing personal, only business. Yet as he studied the details, his target, a young pregnant woman, something inside him stirred uneasily. He silenced it, reminding himself that hesitation was a luxury he could not afford. Still, a faint voice in the back of his mind whispered questions he didn't want to answer. This job would not be like the others. And for the first time, the hardened hitman was about to face a conflict he could not fight with bullets or fists, but with the remnants of a conscience he thought was long dead. The hitman followed her with the same precision he had used on countless assignments before. His steps blended into the rhythm of the city, each movement calculated so she would never sense the danger trailing her. She walked slowly, one hand supporting her belly, the other clutching a small bag of groceries. There was nothing extraordinary about the scene, yet it drew him in. The way she paused to smile faintly at a child waving from a window, the way her pace adjusted with care for the life inside her. Every detail struck him harder than the weight of the weapon hidden beneath his jacket. He rehearsed the plan in his mind: approach, strike quickly, make it clean. The alley ahead offered perfect cover. She would never see it coming, and the contract would be fulfilled. His breathing steadied, his focus narrowing to the moment he had trained for. But then she stopped beneath a street lamp, the golden glow outlining her face. She looked upward, eyes soft, as though she was whispering a silent prayer. The serenity in her expression pierced through the hardened layers of his resolve. Something shifted inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. It was not pity, not exactly. More like a sudden awareness that she was more than a target. She was a woman carrying a future, fragile yet radiant with hope. His hand tightened on the weapon, but it refused to rise. Instead, he found himself watching, almost guarding her, as if some part of him wanted to ensure she reached home safely. For the first time in his career, The hitman hesitated not out of fear but out of an emotion he couldn't name. And in that hesitation, a dangerous seed was planted, one that would grow into something neither he nor the woman could have foreseen. The mistress's impatience grew with every passing day, her simmering jealousy threatening to boil over. She had paid for results, not excuses, and the lack of confirmation gnawed at her like an open wound. Late at night, she would pour herself glass after glass of wine, pacing the length of her penthouse, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. When she finally dialed the hitman, her voice was sharp and venomous, demanding to know why the job wasn't finished. "You've had more than enough time," she hissed, her tone dripping with contempt. "She's just a pregnant woman. How hard can it be?" Her words carried no shred of humanity, no flicker of hesitation at ordering the death of another. To her, the wife was an obstacle to be removed, nothing more. The hitman listened silently, his jaw tightening as her cruelty cut deeper than she realized. He had dealt with ruthless clients before, but there was something uniquely vile about this woman. She spoke not from necessity or desperation, but from envy and greed. Each insult she spat only pushed against the fragile wall he had built to contain the conflict inside him. When he remained silent, she pressed harder. "Don't forget who's paying you. Fail me, and you'll regret it. I don't care how you do it, just make sure she's gone before anyone suspects a thing." The coldness in her voice revealed her growing obsession, and though she believed her threats would motivate him, they had the opposite effect. Hanging up, the hitman felt a rare surge of anger. Her cruelty made the wife's innocence shine brighter in his memory. The soft smile, the protective hand over her stomach, the unspoken hope in her eyes. The mistress's impatience didn't harden his resolve to kill, it cracked it further. And with each demand, she unknowingly drove him closer to the decision that would shatter her carefully laid plan. The hitman sat alone in his dimly lit apartment, the silence pressing down on him heavier than any weapon he had ever carried. His gun lay on the table, cold and gleaming under the flickering light, a reminder of the life he had chosen and the contract he had accepted. Yet his hand refused to reach for it. For the first time in years, he found himself paralyzed, not by fear, but by something far more dangerous: doubt. He replayed every encounter with the pregnant wife in his mind like a reel of film stuck on repeat. The way she carried herself despite the visible weight of her condition, the softness in her eyes when she placed a hand over her growing belly, and the gentle smile she gave strangers who barely deserved it. None of it fit into the image of a target. She wasn't an enemy, a rival, or a criminal. She was life itself, pure, vulnerable, and filled with hope. The thought of extinguishing that light clawed at him, tearing through the steel walls he had built around his conscience. But the contract loomed over him like a noose. He had been raised in a world where loyalty to the job was survival. Breaking it wasn't just dishonor, it was a death sentence. The mistress's threats echoed in his mind, reminding him that betrayal came with consequences. Yet, as much as he tried to focus on the money, on the blood-stained code he had followed for years, his chest ached with an emotion he barely recognized: compassion. And beneath it, something even more unsettling: affection, a quiet pull toward the very woman he had been sent to destroy. Nights became restless battles within his own mind. He stared at the ceiling, haunted by questions he had never dared ask himself before. What if he saved instead of destroyed? What if, for once, he chose life over death? The answers terrified him because they didn't belong to the hitman he had always been. They belonged to someone else, someone new, someone human. And though he fought it, he knew the decision was no longer about a contract or a client. It was about the woman who had unknowingly awakened a piece of his soul he thought had died long ago. The moment of decision came like lightning, sudden, irreversible. The hitman had tracked the pregnant wife to a quiet street, the shadows thick enough to cloak his movements. His finger lingered on the trigger, his heart pounding louder than the silence around him. But as he caught sight of her pausing to adjust her scarf, tenderly resting her hand on her belly, something inside him shattered. Instead of pulling the trigger, he acted on instinct, protecting her, not destroying her. A speeding car approached from the opposite lane, its driver careless and distracted. The hitman seized the opportunity. With calculated precision, He caused a commotion that diverted attention, making it appear as though she had narrowly escaped a tragic accident. To her, it was luck. To him, it was salvation. He had staged a cover, transforming her near death into a second chance at life, while ensuring the mistress believed the plan was in motion. The wife stood trembling on the sidewalk, breathless, clutching her belly. She whispered a quiet prayer of thanks, unaware of the man in the shadows who had chosen to defy his very nature for her sake. Though he remained unseen, their fates had collided in that moment, an invisible thread binding them together. Over the following days, he found himself watching over her, not as a predator but as a guardian. Whenever her path grew dangerous, he intervened subtly, never revealing his face. She began to sense a presence, not threatening but strangely protective. At night, she would glance around as if she felt someone's unseen eyes watching over her. A peculiar comfort replaced fear. Though he kept his identity hidden, their connection deepened in silence, built on unseen gestures and unspoken trust. For the first time in his life, the hitman wasn't following orders, he was following his heart. The hitman had prepared for this moment countless times in his mind, rehearsing the cold efficiency of a kill. Yet when the chance finally arrived, something inside him rebelled. The pregnant wife walked along a deserted path, her steps slow, her hand often brushing over her rounded belly as though she were already communicating with the child inside. Her vulnerability pierced through the armor of years he had built as a killer. Instead of striking, he acted in a way that surprised even himself. He engineered a distraction that made it look as though fate itself had intervened. A crumbling piece of scaffolding fell nearby, shattering on the pavement, sending the wife stumbling back in shock. To anyone watching, it seemed like a tragic accident narrowly avoided, but the truth was far more deliberate. In reality, it was his calculated choice to save her without ever revealing who he was. To the mistress, who eagerly awaited results, this could be spun as progress. To the wife, it was a brush with mortality that left her shaken but alive. In that instant, an invisible connection formed between them. The wife didn't see his face, but she felt something beyond fear, a strange presence lingering, as though someone unseen had chosen to protect her. She couldn't explain why her heart didn't race with terror, but instead with a fragile sense of safety. For the hitman, the act carved a permanent crack in his hardened soul. He began to shadow her not as a predator, but as a silent guardian. Every hesitation, every choice to delay, deepened his emotional entanglement. Though he remained a ghost in her world, his heart betrayed him, binding him to her in ways he could no longer deny. The mistress leaned back in her lavish apartment, glass of wine in hand, her voice sharp and dripping with venom as she spoke over the phone. "I don't care how you do it," she hissed, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. "Make it look clean. Make it look like an accident. The longer you take, the more dangerous it becomes for me. Do you understand?" Her arrogance was palpable, her certainty unshakable. She believed she was untouchable, that her beauty and the millionaire's affection gave her a shield no one could pierce. What she didn't know was that every word was being recorded. The hitman, once her instrument of destruction, had turned against her silently. His phone captured her venomous threats, her mocking laughter as she bragged about how easily she manipulated the wealthy man, and her chilling confidence that the wife's disappearance would open a future of riches and power. Her downfall began in that very moment, though she remained oblivious. She lounged in silk and luxury, pacing the room with practiced superiority, believing the hitman was still under her command. She boasted about the wife's pregnancy, calling it a pathetic attempt to chain him with responsibility. Her words dripped with cruelty, showcasing a heart devoid of empathy, a soul consumed by greed. As she spoke, her voice rose with a mocking laugh, convinced that loyalty could always be bought, that fear could always silence conscience. Yet her arrogance became the rope she unknowingly tied around her own neck. The hitman listened in silence, his mind calm, his plan precise. Every recorded sentence was another nail in her coffin. Her confidence blinded her to the truth, that betrayal has a way of circling back, and the very man she had trusted to destroy another life was now the one holding the evidence that would destroy hers. The mistress's perfect world began to crumble the moment she realized the hitman wasn't delivering updates anymore. Panic simmered beneath her anger as she stormed into the meeting place, her heels clicking against the polished floor like gunshots. She expected obedience, results, and fear in his eyes. But instead, she was met with silence, a silence so heavy it chilled her confidence. When the hitman finally appeared, his gaze was unreadable, his presence colder than she had ever known. Something in him had shifted, and for the first time, she sensed danger directed not at the wife, but at herself. "You think you can play me?" she spat, her voice trembling between fury and disbelief. She lunged toward him, demanding answers, but the sound of another set of footsteps froze her mid-breath. The wife entered, her face pale yet resolute, her hands resting protectively on her swollen belly. The mistress's eyes widened in horror. This wasn't supposed to happen, the wife was supposed to be gone. The air grew thick with tension. The mistress's bravado faltered, her words tumbling out in desperate accusations. "You betrayed me. You were supposed to finish it," she screamed at the hitman, her voice cracking. He remained unmoved, his silence more terrifying than any threat. Then, calmly, he revealed the truth. He had the recordings, her own words damning her beyond escape. The wife stood her ground, her heartbreak etched into every glance she gave the woman she once called a friend. For the mistress, it was the ultimate humiliation. Not only was her plan exposed, but she had been outmaneuvered by the very man she thought she controlled. The confrontation wasn't marked by violence, but by a brutal shift of power. In that room, the mistress realized her empire of lies had collapsed, and no amount of rage or seduction could save her. She was trapped, cornered by loyalty, love, and justice. The flashing red and blue lights washed over the mistress's face as officers closed in, her once proud posture crumbling into frantic resistance. She screamed protests, clawed at the air, swore she was being framed, but the recording spoke louder than her denials. Every venomous threat, every cruel word, every calculated plan was now in the hands of the authorities. Her arrogance dissolved into desperation as handcuffs snapped around her wrists, marking the end of her reign of manipulation. The hitman, once an instrument of her schemes, became the very weapon of her undoing. For the first time in years, he stood in court not as a shadow but as a man reclaiming his soul. His testimony was steady, unflinching, recounting how the mistress had hired him and demanded a pregnant woman's death. He carried no illusions that redemption was simple, but in choosing truth over silence, he carved a path away from the darkness that had defined his life. The wife, though scarred by betrayal and danger, rose from the ordeal stronger than ever. With her child's life preserved and justice served, she discovered a resilience she never realized she possessed. Every tear, every sleepless night, became part of her transformation from victim to survivor. She was no longer defined by her husband's neglect or her best friend's treachery. She was defined by her courage, her will to protect her unborn child, and her ability to walk forward unbroken. As she stood with her hands resting gently on her belly, gratitude filled her heart, not only for her child, but for the second chance at life that had been granted. In the shadows of betrayal, love and justice had triumphed, leaving her with a future worth fighting for. In the quiet that followed the storm, the wife often found herself reflecting on the path that had nearly destroyed her. Betrayal had shattered the pillars of her world, her husband's indifference, her best friend's treachery, the cruel plot that almost stole her life and her child's. Trust had been broken so deeply that she wondered if it could ever be rebuilt. Yet, amidst the wreckage, she discovered something she hadn't expected: survival born from compassion, and strength forged in truth. The hitman's role lingered like a paradox in her mind. He had been sent to end her life, yet he became the one who saved it. His hesitation, his silent protection, and finally, his willingness to sacrifice himself by exposing the mistress's scheme revealed a man more human than monster. His actions left an imprint not of fear, but of gratitude, an understanding that even in the darkest of lives, a spark of love could ignite change. For the hitman, redemption was bittersweet. He couldn't erase the shadows of his past, but by choosing to honor blood over money, innocence over corruption, he gave the wife and her unborn child a chance at a future. In his sacrifice, he discovered something rare and fragile: the ability to care, to protect, to love in silence even when he knew he could never fully belong in her world. The story closed not with perfect happiness, but with hard-won hope. Betrayal had destroyed trust, but compassion had built resilience. Lies had nearly claimed a life, but truth had ensured justice. And though the scars of the ordeal would remain, the wife walked forward carrying not just her child, but also the enduring lesson that even in the face of cruelty, love and justice could rise from the unlikeliest of places.